The lifeguards had never seen anything like this before. Out of seemingly nowhere, hundreds of these strange creatures started slowly making their way onto the beach, and there seemed to be no stopping it. At first, the lifeguards try to be calm about it, but then they see what they are really dealing with. But what really were these creatures? Why did they suddenly make their way into the beach, and why did everybody have to be evacuated? But before we start, make sure to subscribe if you haven't and hit that notification bell so that you won't miss any new stories. Alice was an ordinary woman who worked as a hairdresser at a small salon in a quiet town by the sea. She loved her job, and the people she worked with were like a second family to her. But Alice had always felt drawn to the ocean and the creatures that lived within it. Whenever she had the chance, she would go down to the beach to take a nice long walk or to see what she could find. Alice had always been a bit of an adventure seeker in her spare time, so when she heard about a secluded beach on the other side of the country that was rumored to be home to some rare and unusual species, she knew she had to see it for herself. After packing her bag and saying goodbye to her colleagues at the hair salon, Alice set off on a long drive to the beach. The road to the beach was very bumpy, and her car wasn't able to travel through the off-road mountain paths that led all the way to shore, so Alice had to continue on foot. After a while, she felt very happy because she finally got closer to the beach. The sound of the waves clashing against the rocks makes her feel very relieved. Alice used to visit the beach as the sound of the waves crashing against the shore helped her to relax, and the seagulls calling overhead filled her senses. She had always loved coming to the beach to clear her mind and just enjoy the peaceful atmosphere around the place. But today was different. As she walked, she suddenly noticed something emerging coming out of the water. At first, when she saw it, she thought it was some seaweed or debris. But as it got closer, she realized it was something far more unusual. It was something that she never has seen in her whole life. The creature looked like nothing she had ever seen before, with long and thin legs writhing around its body. Alice's heart raced as she quickly pulled out her phone to snap a picture. She thought that everyone must be aware of this strange sea creature. She actually felt scared for his life. Alice turned around and ran back to her car as fast as she could. What did she supposed to do now? Did she have to call someone for help? Besides, that creature was something that no one had ever seen in his life. So, she decided to head back to the house and figure out what happened there. She decided to call her best friend Bob. Bob was a veterinarian, and he knew a lot of things about animals and every sea creature. She was hoping that Bob would have some insight. He was very skeptical at first, but as Alice described the creature's details, he began to believe her. Bob, after he learns all about these sea creatures, told her he would travel to her first thing in the morning. He wanted to see the creatures in person. Only then could he give her more clarity on the matter. Therefore, the next morning, Bob arrived at Alice's doorstep, ready to go to the beach. After a couple of minutes, they finally reached the beach. But now it was totally empty. Bob looked at Alice with questionable eyes. "Are you sure this is the right beach?" But Alice was completely sure that this was the right beach. Maybe they have to wait for these creatures to arise at the surface of the sea. The next day, the duo decided to visit the local town's marketplace. Bob and Alice were eager to know if the locals had any tales or had witnessed anything similar. Navigating through stalls of fresh fish and handicrafts, they approached elderly fishermen, asking them about the creatures. While some chuckled, dismissing it as a mere figment of imagination, others nodded gravely, pointing them towards the oldest tavern in town. Approaching the bar, they ordered drinks and were soon introduced to Captain Elias, a retired sailor with a glint of the sea in his eyes. With a raspy voice, Elias told a haunting tale of his youth when he had encountered creatures of a similar kind. They were omens, he whispered, harbingers of change. By the next morning, word about the mysterious sea creatures had spread like wildfire. Local news channels, eager for a unique story, began to flood the town. Marine biologists, intrigued by Bob and Alice's account, started setting up equipment on the beach. The beach, once a refuge of solitude for Alice, now resembled a festival ground. Tents were pitched, and the soft sound of waves was drowned out by chatter and the hum of machines. Tourists with cameras and children with buckets and spades thronged the sandy shores, all hoping to witness the enigmatic creatures. Bob and Alice exchanged concerned glances, realizing the serenity of this place might be forever altered. Despite the excitement and anticipation, days passed without a single sighting of the mysterious sea creatures. One evening, as the sun cast long shadows on the sand, Alice took a solitary walk. She encountered an elderly woman, her face etched with lines like the rings of an ancient tree. "Seeking the beings, dearie?" she asked. When Alice nodded, the woman continued, "They come from below and beyond, not just the sea but the fabric of time itself." Before Alice could inquire further, the woman wandered off, leaving her more perplexed than ever. Bob, having spent days researching and connecting dots, shared a theory with Alice over breakfast. "I've been thinking," he began, "what if they're from the deepest parts of the ocean? Perhaps they're migrating due to disruptions in their environment or shifts in underwater currents." Alice considered his hypothesis, thinking about the old woman's words. "It's plausible," she agreed, "but we need evidence." Determined to get to the bottom of this enigma, Bob and Alice decided to explore the depths themselves. They rented a sturdy boat equipped with diving gear. The ocean, vast and mysterious, awaited them. Beneath the surface, a world of wonders unfolded. As they descended further, Alice spotted peculiar patterns on the seabed, curved lines and shapes that seemed intentional yet random. Amidst the search for answers, banners and streamers began adorning the town's streets. The annual Coastal Festival was approaching, a cherished tradition celebrating the sea and its wonders. Yet, there was a palpable sense of anticipation and hope that the creatures might return, turning the festival into a spectacle the town would never forget. Wandering among the festival stalls, Alice came across a wizened old storyteller, her voice weaving tales of yore. As a crowd gathered, the elder spoke of sea walkers, mystical creatures from local legends that graced the shores during auspicious times. Their presence, she said, was a sign of good fortune and the land's contentment. The description eerily matched the creatures Alice had seen, deepening the enigma. As twilight draped the sky, the melodic tunes of the festival were interrupted by gasps and murmurs. From the horizon, silhouettes of the creatures approached, their numbers far surpassing their previous appearances. The townspeople, elated by the creatures' timely reappearance, quickly embraced them as the highlight of the festival. Musicians composed impromptu melodies in their honor, dancers mirrored their graceful movements, and children ran alongside them, laughter echoing across the sands. The creatures, it seemed, had become an intrinsic part of the town's culture and festivities. While the town celebrated, Alice's observant eyes spotted a man at the periphery. Unlike the jubilant crowd, he seemed absorbed in studying the creatures, his fingers deftly sketching their forms on a canvas. The intensity of his gaze, his meticulous notes, and the way he occasionally nodded in satisfaction intrigued Alice deeply. Drawn to him, Alice approached and extended her hand. "I'm Alice. I've been trying to learn more about these creatures, and you seem familiar with them." The man looked up, a hint of a smile on his face. "Mr. Daniels," he introduced himself, his eyes glinting with mischief. "I've lived here for years. These creatures in this town, they've been my muses for a long time." In a quaint cafe near the shore, Alice, Bob, and Mr. Daniels settled down, the aroma of fresh coffee enveloping them. As they sipped, Mr. Daniels spoke of his younger days, traveling the world, drawing inspiration from nature's marvels, and how his love for art blossomed. "Nature," he mused, "has its own way of painting stories. I merely try to capture its essence." The trio delved into discussions about the enigmatic sea beings. Their movements, Alice noted, were rhythmic, as if dancing to an unseen tune. Mr. Daniels nodded, lost in thought. "They move as if they're a part of something grander, an orchestra of nature," he whispered. Equipped with notepads, cameras, and binoculars, the three became constant figures on the beach. Dawn till dusk, they documented every nuance, every play of light on the creatures, capturing their ethereal beauty. One evening, Bob looked up from his notes, a frown on his face. "Their appearances, their patterns, they're almost predictable," he said, voicing his growing suspicion. "It's as if they're guided, maybe even controlled." Alice listened, pondering his words, but Mr. Daniels remained silent, a distant look in his eyes, fueling Bob's doubts further. Curiosity piqued, Alice and Bob decided to visit Mr. Daniels' studio. Entering the wooden cabin, they were greeted by a mesmerizing sight. Sculptures of trees, birds, and sea life adorned every corner, and canvases portrayed nature's wonders. Among them, designs remarkably similar to the sea creatures were scattered. Alice felt a connection, but the mystery deepened, intertwining art with nature's enigmas. The studio was filled with the soft humming of the afternoon breeze. As Alice admired a particularly intricate sculpture, a sudden gust of wind sent it dancing. It glided, twirled, and bobbed, eerily reminiscent of the sea creatures. Bob's eyes widened in realization. "Did you see that, Alice?" he murmured. "The wind ... it quote giving them life." The uncanny resemblance between the moving sculptures and the sea creatures couldn't be dismissed. Alice's gaze shifted between the studio's artifacts and Mr. Daniels, her suspicion mounting. "There's a link," she whispered to Bob, "between these artworks and our mysterious sea dwellers. Daniels knows more than he's letting on." Under the cloak of darkness, Alice and Bob tread softly towards the beach, their torches revealing fleeting shadows. They felt the weight of the night's secrets pressing on them. Their ears caught the distant rustling of leaves and the lapping of waves, but they were listening for something more, any hint of the creature's nocturnal activities. Hidden behind dense foliage, they stumbled upon a camouflaged workshop. It was a treasure trove of design sketches, tools, and unfinished prototypes that unmistakably resembled the sea creatures. The room told a tale of passion, artistry, and a deep understanding of the elements. A blueprint titled "Wind-Driven Sea Walkers" lay sprawled on the workbench. Confronted with their discovery, Mr. Daniels' shoulders sagged, a mixture of resignation and relief in his eyes. "They were meant to be a gift," he began, "a fusion of art and nature inspired by ancient sea legends. Crafted from lightweight materials, these creatures would dance on the ocean's surface, driven by the wind. The town's awe and wonder had been his greatest reward." With a solemn tone, Mr. Daniels began, "The oceans are dying, and few notice." He spoke of vanishing coral reefs, declining fish populations, and the dangers of pollution. My creatures were a desperate attempt to highlight these issues. If I could captivate attention with mythical beings, perhaps people would care more for the real ones. Bob struggled to reconcile his initial enchantment with the truth, feeling both admiration and betrayal. Alice, on the other hand, saw the brilliance behind the deceit. "It's provocative," she mused, "and sometimes we need to be provoked to notice, to care." She saw Mr. Daniels not as a deceiver, but as a messenger. Inspired, Alice addressed the townsfolk. "What if we use this art not just as a spectacle, but as a beacon for change?" She envisioned an annual event showcasing the wind-driven creatures paired with educational initiatives about marine ecosystems. "We could be a town that not only celebrates myths but champions reality." The proposal was met with overwhelming support. The town's leaders, recognizing the potential, incorporated the sea spider installations into their festival's legacy. It stood as a testament to their renewed pledge to the ocean, an intertwining of tradition with conservation. And so a new tradition was born, one rooted in respect for the deep blue. As the sun set, casting a golden hue over the horizon, Alice and Bob stood side by side on the beach. The creatures, bathed in twilight, danced upon the waves. They weren't just figments of Mr. Daniels' imagination, but symbols of hope and change. In that moment, the duo recognized the profound truth. Sometimes it takes a touch of fiction to illuminate reality.